When you look at a Harley-Davidson, the actual motorcycle frame is like the picture frame, and the engine sticks out. That is the subject. And you look at this fine piece of machinery it's enveloped in this metal frame around it. And to me, like anybody that's a bit of a technophile looks at that, like the valves and the fittings and all the mechanical pieces, and it strikes a chord inside you that's very hard to describe. But to me, it's like a piece of rolling art, with the frame being the picture frame. And making it run, the sound of it, you know what? It doesn't appeal to everybody, and it's very hard to explain to everybody. But once you're around them a little bit, it really grows on you. And for me, once you've got your Harley-Davidson running and you're riding it, it's like flying, but you're just 3 feet off the ground. The freedom is there.
I'm retired for the last 5 years now, but if you want to go way back to the beginning, I was born in Toronto in 1946, and I was born and raised there until 19. Did 24 years in the Navy. I was also an instructor for a couple of years, instructed radar technicians. And
you know, have you taken on any other jobs, or have you just been basically concentrating on restoring motorcycles?
yeah, I just restored motorcycles in my garage now as a hobby, and it keeps me entertained and busy through the winters, and then I get to enjoy riding them in the summertime. So I like restoring them, and I like riding them.
You said that your interest was custom bikes, maybe some cars, painting.
Well, yeah, back when I was young, you know, when I was 19, 20 years old in the 60s, everybody was starting to chop motorcycles and custom paint bikes. And then when I joined the Navy, I went to Halifax, there wasn't anybody doing anything down there. So I started custom painting motorcycles and caught on.
At one point, you told me that you actually met Arlen Ness and you actually bought one of his custom bikes. That was an interesting thing.
Well, yeah, we used to go to Laconia, the big motorcycle rally in Laconia every year, and I think in 1975 or 76, I went to Laconia and ran into Arlen Ness for one of his creations, him and Dave Perwitz, and I asked him what's he planning on doing. Did he ever sell it? He said, sure, and I said, what would you want for it? So he said, $3,200. So I said, I'll buy it. So I bought it, and I had the bike for about 7 years. It was a fun bike.
You said that it was the centerpiece in 2010?
Yeah, it was a featured bike at the 2010 motorcycle show in Toronto, Ontario there, which is quite a large show there. And yeah, and a fellow in Milton, Ontario owns it. And Arlen's been trying to get it back for his museum, and keeps complaining about why he sold it so cheap.
You've built a lot of bikes, but the bike to your direct left, your 23 police bike.
Yeah, it was in pretty nasty shape, and as a matter of fact, the fellow that I got it from had 2 old bikes, and he had them both torn apart as basket cases, and then he sold one of them, but he had the parts mixed up. It took me about 5 years to restore the bike, and another year to restore the sidecar. But this bike was a Victoria police bike for so long that the brake pedals, which are cast iron, were worn right down. Right down, just about gone. I'm the 5th owner of it. It went from there into an auction. It was sold to a guy that had at Vancouver Machine. I think he was somewhere on Quadra Street. You might know him. Can't remember his name. Then from there, it went to Sidecar Bob. You know Sidecar Bob?
Yep.
He got it. Sidecar Bob went to Jamie Scroggie, and from Jamie Scroggie to me.
Unbelievable. What a history.
Yeah.
And here it is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
I missed Eddie Ng.
Eddie Ng owned it for a brief time?
Yeah.
And this bike is totally complete, functioning, running?
I got over 1,000 miles on it, but I haven't driven it a lot lately because I've got my other bikes. And it's a bit of a dangerous machine. You got to stay out in the country, stay away from automobiles and cars, because it's hard to see, for one thing, because it's camouflage. It's actually Army paint, and it doesn't have modern safety equipment on it, like brake lights and stuff, or signal lights. And you know, you're making a right-hand turn, you put your hand up like this, and car going by, they wave to you. They think you're waving, so you know, you gotta be careful what you're doing with these things.
The tires, the fact that they're white.
Yeah, rubber's white actually. It's not black. But they get so dirty, and the sun makes them go yellow. So years ago, they started putting color and make them black. So they didn't look bad all the time. But yeah, they're gum rubber tires, and they're very soft. And the thing with these motorcycles are you have to keep 60 pounds. With the way those rims, the early rims, are called clincher rims. And before you go for a ride on these motorcycles, you got to make sure you do your due diligence, and there's certain things you got to check. Your life depends on it. Because if you don't have 55 pounds of air in that tire, it gets down to around 30, and you go around the corner, it's going to roll right off the rim. You're going to snag up inside this, and you're going to go down, right? So.
Oh, it disengages the tire right from the rim,
it's a clincher rim. It's just held in by air pressure.
Grabs it, yeah.
Yeah, a little lip in there, so you got to keep 55, 60 pounds at all time, and that's why you kick the tires before you go for a ride, right?
Give it a little check over.
Yeah, I guess that's where kicking the tires come from. I always kick them.
These bikes were definitely made in the day where a rider must have a certain amount of mechanical proficiency.
Well, you don't have to lock this motorcycle at the coffee shop because nobody knows how to ride this baby.
Yeah, it'd be hard for somebody just to hop on and run it.
Yeah, you got all kinds of levers and buttons but the reason for it, if it didn't have a sidecar, and the front brake wasn't invented in 1928, so you only got a contracting, external contracting band rear brake, which is just about like dragging your feet.
Yeah.
If you go up on a hill and you stop with your back brake, and this is a foot clutch. You need both feet up to get going again. Well, you can't put both feet up, you fall over. So this is connected to the clutch. So what you'd reach down and you'd get going, you'd have one foot down, and then you give it some gas, use your hand and get going, and once you got going, then you can put your foot up again, see? So you got to practice that one.
Yeah.
Get on a hill with that, that's not easy.
Over the years, I've had lots of motorcycles. Each one has a story. Each one has a personality. The 350, not being a stranger to that. The 350, I mean, we could sit here and talk. You know, here comes the transmission out of a garden. I meet a guy at a dinner party 40 years ago. I look at his bike under his stairwell. I end up with the bike 40 years later.
That fits on. They'll fit this one.
It's a 1929 Harley-Davidson 350cc single cylinder. Just a beautiful little machine, little lightweight Harley-Davidson. Not too many of them around. I think there was about 1,500 of them made. Got invited to a friend's place for dinner one night. And I met the fellow and his wife. His name's Joe Byron. And up until that point, I had not run into him before. And Joe says, hey, why don't you come over and have a look at my bike? He just lived about half a block down. Joe was a collector of all sorts of stuff. And underneath his stairs that went up to the top of his house was this 350 single Harley-Davidson. I'd never seen one. I was 20 years old, and so that's 40 years ago. And I marveled at it. It was all apart. And, you know, I remember looking at it and observing it, and I thought this was so unique, even back then.
1926, I believe they came out with a small single-cylinder motorcycle to actually for export. I think that we're going to export it, but Indian came out with a 1925 with a single-cylinder Indian Prince, and so I guess that was their answer to the Prince. So they came out with 3 different models. There was an A, which was a 350cc with magneto.
Yeah.
And then the B model had a generator and electric. They came out with the Model C Peashooter. It was an overhead valve.
A year and a half ago, I was sitting at my shop in my office, and the phone rings, and this voice comes on and says, hey, Steve, I bet you don't recognize who this is. And I just said, hey, it's Joe Byron. He says, you remember when you asked me if I ever thought about selling that Harley, that you'd be interested in it? Well, I'm thinking of selling it. Now, are you interested? And I said, yeah, sure. And he says, do you want to look at it? I said, no. I said, I looked at it 40 years ago. I don't think it's changed much. So about the next day, he drives by my house and drops it all off, and it's in bits and pieces and all that stuff, but basically complete. And next thing you know, I'm sitting there admiring my pile of rust, which was once a gleaming 350 single. Regards to the transmission on the 350, a bit of a story there, isn't there?
Well, there is a little bit of a story, because the transmission that was originally in the motorcycle was in very bad shape. The bike had gone over one time, and so the cases were cracked, repaired and welded up. The frame needed some repairs. So we're looking at this transmission. I took it all apart and looking at it and figuring out what we're going to do with it, and it's going to be expensive to repair. And then all of a sudden you came up remembering that you had one in your garage you thought might be similar, and you went back home and had a look, and sure enough it was the same transmission.
And the story behind this transmission is when I had my Harley Harley-Davidson and Honda dealership on Douglas Street. In 1979, one of my friends brought this mud-caked apparatus in. I didn't even really know what it was. And he had actually found this while he was gardening around his house. And he was digging away with a shovel and clank. He hits this thing and he thinks it's a boulder. And he digs down. He's a motorcycle guy too. And he digs down and here it is, a transmission. So I took it and I I'm not really a hoarder, but I kept this transmission thinking in my mind. This is like 1979. And I thought, one day I'm going to have a use for this.
And you still had all the dirt in it. You could at least power wash it, Steve, or hosed it off.
No, I had to bring it over because the ambiance, the mud caked on it, it looked so good.
It had patina, right? You could grow plants in.
You could paint.
But it was in good shape. When we opened it up, the oil was still in there. There was no rust, and the case was good. So, so between the two transmissions, I assembled one, and the other one's spare parts.
Fantastic.
So,
40 years ago, I look at this bike and I end up getting it. 35 years ago, a guy leaves the transmission that fits that bike on my bench. We took it all apart, still had the original oil in it. All the gears are good, and now we've restored it, and it's in that bike. True story, no prevarication. Hey Ray, I want to talk to you about something. I know it's a little personal, but something that I've watched with you, and something that I've really admired, and the fact that you do have Parkinson's, and the fact that you work on these motorcycles with such intricate detail. And I've always thought over the years, how much of a challenge it must be. But I just don't. You never complain about it. You just keep on trucking. You just keep on working on these babies.
It's progressing slowly. I've had it for 5 years now, and it's basically in my right arm.
Yeah.
And I take some medicine for it. It helps a little bit, but I become left-handed. I was right-handed. I just become left-handed.
Oh yeah.
I try not to let it get me down, you just got to press on. And my father had it, but he was very negative and hated it, and it was terrible. I just have a different outlook on it. I just move on. I mean, eventually it's going to disable me, but I'll just try and always stay positive. My inspiration is Michael J. Fox. I watched him on TV one day saying you got to get the best out of every day, and that's what you got to do. The screwdriver's a little harder. Soldering's the worst, I think. You're trying to.
Oh, but it must be totally frustrating for you sometimes, because I look at the intricate detail that you do on these bikes. Doing the dashboard, the lights, and the wiring, and the small precision work on the distributors and generators stuff. But I know that you must just get in there.
Well, I get frustrated, and all of a sudden I'll stop and I'll just regroup and I'll say, Ray, you can do it, and I do it.